me peering my face in to look and see, is the red light on? Okay? Hey, no gang symbols. Okay, all right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. May I have attention, please? All quiet, please. Thank you. Go ahead, take your notes out. We're going to be continuing looking at government, at the issue of legitimacy. Yes? Right? With particular focus on, we'll wrap up with domestic security, and then we'll turn our attention to economic satisfaction. Okay? Reminder to you, when you come in on Tuesday, it's not a 3-day weekend, is it? No. No, it's a 2-day weekend, and on Monday, you're working. You got work to do. You guys have work to do? And in here, it's going to be for my class, that work is going to be getting ready for my quiz. When's my quiz? What period? 7th period, yeah. 7th period. How many questions? 10. They're each worth 1 point, just like I would typically set up. So come in here, ready, prepared for the quiz in here. We'll do that fairly quickly, and then we'll continue on with the notes on that. Okay? Is the quiz going to cover, because you guys need to know, does the quiz cover what we've covered in class and I've given you notes on? No. There might be some overlap. Is it going to potentially cover things that are just in the textbook that we haven't talked about in here? Yes, because it is basically a reading comprehensive quiz for Chapter 1, Sections 1, 2, and 3. Okay? Do any of you have any questions? Yeah. My juniors now, they're like, oh no, Mr. Hanson, you're not giving us the page numbers that we can find the information on. Oh no. Can you help me? Of course I'll help, right? So they were like, where's the stuff on William Jennings Bryan? Well, if you go back into the back of the book and look at all the various different page numbers and looking for an alignment of the page numbers that are actually in that chapter, that'll narrow it down, and lo and behold, there it is. So, yeah. So be prepared on that. I don't have any, besides the videos I'm posting of here, some of the other classes, occasionally there'll be videos that are relevant to the class, and I'll post those for students to watch at home. But I think what you guys, you've got plenty to do to focus on getting ready for the quiz. And I'll tell you what, you can make a mental note of this if you want to. This unit is wrapping up very, very quickly. Have your sheet out in front of you. It's like, we've already gone through, and we're actually going to go into these other ones fairly quickly. So there will be a test on this unit fairly soon, within the next week or two. But it'll be a fairly small test, though. I mean, it's hard to even fair calling it a test because it's so small. Okay? But that'll be coming up because this is just sort of like the basic, the gist, the theory of why does government exist? What do we want governments to do? What do you want a government to do? Scott, what do you want a government to do? Okay, all right. Which of the, does that alive and secure? All right, can we compartmentalize 2 kinds of security? What would be the 2 kinds of security? And? National, all right, you got it, you got it. So, Scott, if you're feeling secure, yeah, I know, it's right there too. If you're feeling secure from national threats, where are those national threats coming from that you're now feeling secure about? I'll give you 2 choices. Domestic is, which is domestic? Here or outside is in. So if you're feeling domestically secure, are there threats in the country that are causing you problems or not? No. They're not, because you're feeling domestically secure. No. Turn me off and listen to me. Yeah, okay? Let me finish up, okay? So if you're feeling the national, actually it was interesting because my 12th grade class was like, can we observe a moment of silence? And I'm like, yeah, actually we can. So I said 30 seconds. We did a moment of silence because today, 19 years after a big national security threat, from, anybody, raise your hand if you know this, from what part of the world 19 years ago did the 9/11 attacks originate from? No, not from California. Silly. It was from Afghanistan. The Taliban government of Afghanistan was allowing an organization called Al-Qaeda. We don't hear about that as much because now you hear more about like ISIS and other things, but they're very similar extreme groups. I bet you know who headed up the Al-Qaeda that organized the attacks. Who headed up Al-Qaeda that organized the 9/11 attacks? He's dead now. Yes, Osama bin Laden, okay? Okay, settle down, get brief. Osama bin Laden was the man organizing the attacks, and so, yeah, I mean, we've done various different things to try and take care of that. So the purpose of government in the minds of many people is to provide security from threats outside and inside, to help us to have economic social satisfaction. Do we also look, raise your hand if you're like, I want my government to provide and protect my opportunity for freedom. Raise your hand if you're like, that matters a lot. Gianna, really, it doesn't? It doesn't matter whether or not the government provides? You're like, wow, I see some hesitancy. Are you saying that there are people in this world that would think that a government was legitimate, that was okay, that didn't provide for freedom? Yeah, you want freedom, but are there people in the world that would be okay and say a government's okay even if it didn't provide for freedom? There aren't people in the world that are okay with that? Yeah, that was my point that we've been making as we've gone through here. Certain parts of the world that have very difficult circumstances for governments to provide for security and economic and social satisfaction, freedom doesn't take as deep a root. The expectation for the government to do that doesn't take as deep a root. And so, for example, I would say this. Actually, a lot of people in North Korea would say that the government is illegitimate, but they would be hard-pressed to try and overthrow that government. There might be a fair number of people in China today that would say that the government's illegitimate. But there's also a fair number of people in China that say, we got a strong government in China, provides for national security, domestic security, I'm doing better economically. That other stuff, as long as I have some free time, I don't need to vote. How many of you guys want to be able to vote and have your vote count when you are 18 and older? How many of you guys want to be able to speak and speak out before you get to 18 and then thereafter? Yeah, you don't have to wait until you're 18 to have a voice. Yes, Trey, you've had your hand up patiently. Go ahead. I think, in fact, this has been something that we've been talking about in classes, and I think we talked about that last time. Oh, well, if you're like a business in a community where there's been protests, but then following the protests, you still have some people who are like conducting violence and vandalism and so forth, yeah, that's domestic insecurity.
I was looking at the New York Times, and there's this one image of the Oregon fires that damaged this neighborhood, and I'm a DC, but all the houses are burned down to the ground, but the trees are just fine.
Yeah, and that's okay. All right, go ahead and remove the picture. Okay, that's good. Go ahead and have your notes up and so forth. That actually is a threat, and people want the government to help out in difficult times and so forth. I would say that's going to fit into economic social satisfaction. Do you look to the government, do you look to the government to provide a situation so that, I mean, it's not vandals or rioters that lit those fires. That was weather related. As I understand, in Oregon and California, most of those fires were started by like lightning. Sometimes they were started by, I think somebody was trying to indicate whether they were going to have a boy or a girl, and that kind of got out of hand. Right, yeah. It's like, whoa. But most of them are natural caused, but it's dangerous. And so do we look, actually, raise your hand if you know the answer to this question. Put your hand down first. See if you know the answer to this question. The United States government has organized what is called, I think it's like the Interagency Fire Agency. That's not even the name of it, because that's silly. But it is what is the city in the West that actually acts as the headquarters to organize fire suppression, firefighters to try to put out various different fires that are taking place in the West? Anybody know where their headquarters are? Do you know? You're wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong.
Idaho.
What city in Idaho?
Idaho Falls.
Nope. Yep, Boise. Boise is the headquarters of that, very well situated to act in order to coordinate and send out, although a lot of those firefighters originate in California, in Oregon, and so forth. But if they need to be moved from one place to another, right now it's a mess. And that's why some places are getting, some places where people are living are getting burned out. Okay, quick question. No, it's not by the government, it's by the weather. Trey?
Okay. So, how come the headquarters isn't where most of the fires are?
Does Idaho have a lot of fires? Yeah, Idaho does as well. I think it's actually kind of makes sense. I mean, it could be a number of different locations, but Idaho is not far from Nevada, Oregon, Washington, and not too far from California as far as flying. So it's a coordination sort of thing.
So what if it's like a fire in like New York?
They have a different center that looks to help coordinate things over there. But I mean, there is a feature in our country, Western fires. There tends to be more forests in the West, not near large populated areas and so forth, and so that's a big challenge in the West. It's not like it doesn't happen in the East, but if you pay attention to like fire issues and so forth, forest fires and range fires and things like that, it tends to happen a lot in the West. Okay. All right, so let's continue moving on. We've got the quiz coming up next time. Come in ready for that. And let's look at our, we got domestic security. Who do we rely on? Ava, who do we rely on primarily to take care of our domestic security challenges when it comes to the government? Local government to provide what kind of police? Yeah, we got police. Okay? And that is an interesting one. I'm constantly been reading about, I mean, I was involved in this when I was a deputy prosecutor before I became a teacher, working with police because police serve and protect. And if somebody violates the law, a criminal, they are going to be charged with a crime. They're going to be taken into court. Now, in a repressive country, that's real bad for them. Does the government have to actually prove that they did what they were charged? No. In this country, does the government have to prove that the person did what they were charged with doing? Yes, they do. So you get a prosecutor on the one side, that was a job I had, proving to the judge or jury the evidence that supports that the person did it. The person on the other side, the defendant, they can do it themselves, or if it's a really serious crime, they would be well advised to accept or hire an attorney. Exactly. So that's the criminal justice system, and that's what we look to help keep peace, to help keep crime down. Does that make sense? It's an interesting feature because one of the concerns that some of the people are having in some of the communities is, for example, Portland. Portland, the law enforcement or the city administration was going, we need more police. So they're asking outlying counties and cities and so forth if they could like send some of their police in. And some of those police chiefs are like, no, we're not going to do it. I mean, we see you got a problem there, but no, we're not going to do it. Because they were looking and they were like, wow, your police are getting hit with rocks and bricks and so forth. And they were concerned that the people weren't being arrested and charged with crimes. Is there much law enforcement deterrence if the people who commit crimes aren't arrested and charged with crimes and then go through the judicial system and pay the consequence if they're proven guilty? There might be, I mean, it's like, how many of you guys know people, maybe yourself, who have adults in their life, maybe parents, that say, if you do that, you're going to be in trouble. And then they don't get into trouble. You're like, if you know people like that, and if it's yourself, it's like, how much deterrence is that? Or is that like a false, what they would call like a paper tiger, right? You're not going to get really much. How many of you guys are like, I'm glad, actually, that when my parents say I'm going to be in trouble if I do that, I actually get in trouble because I know where that boundary is, and I am learning some life lessons. I'm learning the boundaries. I'm becoming grown up and more mature, and I'm going to apply those lessons to my little youngins when we beget them and begot them and so forth in the future. Get them? Beget them, begot. I'm using ancient language. It's okay? Question here and then over there. No, not necessarily. Your Honor, I would argue, or ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I would argue that the evidence supports the finding that this person is guilty. No, you don't have to refer to yourself as a third person. I'll answer other questions about the courtroom because I spent plenty of time in the courtroom way, way back when. Other questions, comments? Yes? Paper tiger. What is going to threaten you more and appear to be a greater thing? A real tiger with claws, or like a paper tiger? Paper tigers might look pretty cool, but they're not that dangerous. Because you can go, hey, paper tiger, here's a match. That's it. So paper tiger is a use of an expression to show it might look really scary, but in fact, it's really not. Okay? It has really no power whatsoever. So, domestic security. One thing I think that's very important, write this down because the United States is very fortunate that we don't have as many people living in the country, groups of people living in the country, different religious groups that hate each other, or different ethnic groups that hate each other. Now, we're not perfect. We're not perfect. We do have situations that make it difficult. It is not perfect. I mean, if you're African American living in this country and you look around, you're like, has this thing worked out really well for us over the long span of U.S. history? You'd have to say, with the evidence in front of you, not so great. I mean, that's a challenge, and that is a serious issue unto itself. All right? But as far as like people, parts of a country that are like, I don't want you in my country, I want you out of my country, I want you gone, that can create a domestic security challenge. I mean, think, for example, you'll get to this next year when you cover history, IB history, World War II. If you're a Jew living in Germany or any of the areas occupied by Germany in World War II, are you feeling some domestic insecurity? Yeah. Just a little bit, yeah, because the majority population, the government, Hitler is like rounding you up and killing you. Okay? Not much fun. Okay? So those are the kinds of things that I'm talking about. Yeah.
So, you're like that basically. So say like, for example, like Mormons and Christians hate each other and made their own like land in the U.S. And say like a Mormon wants to change into a Christian, does he have to like, he or she have to move out of the northern country that
Okay. All right. So we're talking about various different religious issues associated with the history of the United States of America. All right? So I'll answer it this way. Are you ready? Do all people in this country subscribe to exactly the same religious belief system? No. No. Okay? Now, as we'll see in this class, and some of you know this, do you have a right under our Constitution, our governing document, to have religious beliefs and practice your religion free of like government interference most of the time? Yes, yes. Freedom of religion is a very, very important freedom in this country. Okay? Now, have we had times in our country where people have been repressed because of their religious beliefs? Yes. Thankfully, it doesn't happen too much. But you don't have to go too far. For example, you bring up the folks who are part of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also known as Mormons. Okay? And the student said, would you please refer to it as Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, because that is the name of that is taken by the people of that religious faith. If you go back to, here's an interesting question. Do you know, what state has the highest percentage, that was fast, of people of that faith? Utah. Other states that have pretty high percentage, Idaho and so forth. So, interesting question. See if Trey, if you know this. In what state in this country was that church started?
Iowa?
No?
It certainly had some, Missouri.
Utah.
Missouri was big. I think New York was. Missouri was a large community and so forth. So, in Missouri, you have a new religion in the middle part of the 1800s, and a lot of people around them that were not part of that religion were persecuting them. Okay, so those people were feeling domestic insecurity because of their religious faith. And so they're looking around and they're like, government, are you helping us? And so forth. They weren't feeling a lot of that help and so forth. Their solution, what do you suppose they did in the Missouri area as they were feeling not much security? No. What did they do? Did they stay?
They moved.
They moved. Where?
Utah.
To Utah. Exactly. You're like, hello? I mean, because Utah was safer. It wasn't populated so much by people from, there were a lot of natives living there and so forth. But that is an exception. Okay? If you look today in our country, do you see a lot of violent persecution because of religious belief systems in our country today? You do? Where?
Well, like,
We're not talking about rude people that say, like, try to make fun or so forth at people's thing. We're talking about, we're going to line up people of a different faith and kill them. Is that taking place in our country? And if so, where?
well, okay, so I have a,
No. I mean,
like, kind of. Well, not like we're gonna shoot him, but like,
good.
riot in, well, like.
There are other rioting issues and so forth associated with protesters that are more than protesters. Is it okay to have a civil protest and march down a street where you got a parade permit and so forth and saying that you want there to be justice and better police conditions and so forth and whatever? Yes, that is legal. That is protected. Can you say, I feel very strongly about what I feel strongly about and punch somebody in the face and destroy their place of business? That's called a crime. Okay, so those people are going, that's where freedom stops, and now my freedom is being infringed because I'm not feeling secure living in this country. So those are challenges we're actually going through, and it popped up in certain places. I would say in the Boise area, in Ada County, has it been? Not too much. Yeah. So yeah, and and that a protest, if it is just a protest, even if it's not very popular, is a protest, and that's perfectly fine within the confines of the way we work. Okay, let me tell you what happened. Let me go write this down. Okay, Yugoslavia. I want you to write the notes on Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was a country that existed in Europe, and it was put together as a country because there was lots of people who had Slavic background. Slavic. It's like there's Germanic background, there's Scandinavian and so forth. Slavic. Although, you can put this down as well. And you can see it somewhat by how the images came, with the dates and the images. In fact, if you were to go through and look at the different peoples living in Yugoslavia, many of them didn't so much identify themselves as a Yugoslav. They identified themselves as a Serb, or a Croat, or a Slovene, or a Bosniak, or a Kosovar, or Macedonian, or Montenegrin. I think I've covered most of them, right? Those are a lot of different groups of people who, if you ask them, even at the time of Yugoslavia, many of them would say, I want to be part of my own separate country. I don't like being part of the same country as these guys over there. Because they're Slavic, their languages were pretty similar, but key differences of religion. And it doesn't always happen to be that if there's religious differences, there's violence. But if you get a history of violence mixed in with religion, mixed in with other kinds of things, then it becomes, guess what? A domestic security challenge. It's almost like your country is imploding. Instead of being invaded from outside, it's falling apart inside. Best example from U.S. history. Closest example from U.S. history. All right? Tell me, Vera, when in U.S. history did a certain segment of the population of the United States of America say, we want out of here? You covered it last year. I'll give you a clue. It started in 1860 with the election of Abraham Lincoln. I'll give you another clue. He's like, no pressure, no pressure. What part of the country at the time were like, we don't want Lincoln as our president, we want to leave? North or South wanted to leave? Yep, South. Okay? The South. They call it the Civil War. It was, in a sense, a domestic security insurrection. The South was like, we're a separate country. The North was like, nuh-uh. You're a naughty group of people, and you're not going to leave. You're going to stay. You're going to go to your room for a while, and then we'll let you do whatever you want to. Anyway, so that's a civil war. Question here. In the years after the Civil War, like within, it's a complicated answer, but within a decade or so.
What would you describe as Ireland?
What?
Ireland?
Ireland is an interesting thing. If you want to go and, I'm not going to get into the whole thing of Ireland, but Ireland, there are people in Ireland, they're like, we're British. They live in Northern Ireland. Not all of them. They tend to be Protestants who really like being part of the nation of Britain. There are other people in Ireland, particularly like the main part of Ireland, and they've got a Catholic background and so forth, and like, we want to be a separate country. So if you look over there, oh, there it is. Right up here, not the top row, but the second from the top, there's Ireland, right? They gained independence beginning in the 1920s after a fight. They're like, we don't want to be part of Britain anymore. And the fight was fairly short. Ireland got its independence, except the northern part, many of them, not all, but many of them wanted to remain part of Britain. So that's why the official name for the United Kingdom, Britain, is called the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, exactly. But that's a good example of where there was civil insurrection, and thankfully it's mostly calmed down quite a bit now. But when I started teaching, there was still pretty tense.
So if there is currently in a country, particularly U.S. civil insurrection with a certain state from the next, we break them off maybe?
No, you will see. Write this down. There is no permission in the United States Constitution for a state to leave. Once you join, you're in. There were only 13 that voluntarily joined, and guess how many of those 13 were allowed to leave in this, the time leading up to the Civil War? South Carolina, no. North Carolina, no. Georgia, no. Virginia, no. So there you go. There's the answer. It's not allowable, although I actually posed this to a question to students in one class. What if the majority of the population of, say, Hawaii, which didn't necessarily come in as voluntarily as perhaps some people think, what if the majority of the population of Hawaii voted to leave? And I asked the students, they're like, how many of you guys are going to let them leave? Most of the 12th graders in my class were like, yeah, let them leave. Okay, interesting question. Okay, but those are the kinds of questions that come up when you talk about this domestic security situation. Sometimes it's like, just let them go. And that was the situation in Yugoslavia. Eventually, instead of having one unified country, because the problems and challenges were so great, they're like, here's the solution to the domestic security challenge of people fighting against each other and rioting and civil war. I mean, this is just, we're not talking about crime. We're talking about like big community stuff. The solution was break up into lots of different countries. I mean, you can see that visually there. And many of the people living there now are like, we're okay with that. But it was a very difficult thing to go through at the time. Where's what? Yugoslavia? Yeah. Right here. It's like just east across the Adriatic Sea from Italy. Okay? Just to give you a context. It's okay. Southeastern Europe, because you're like, yeah, where is that? Yeah. Okay? So, domestic security challenges. Let's get to economic social satisfaction. Ready? Ready? Quick question. So I don't want to get too far behind. I mean, it's like good questions and so forth, but let's.
So if a state's not allowed to leave, like the U.S., can they leave the UA or whatever it's called?
The what?
The UA or whatever.
What is the UA? I'm not sure what the UA is. There's the United Nations.
Yeah, UN.
The United Nations. Yeah, the United Nations is a very quick answer. The United Nations is an organization of most all of the countries in the world, and it has come together at least to talk. It's not like they have all power, so it's not so much of an interesting question. You can leave or come. It doesn't matter so much, okay? But it's not a country. There's no one world government. Who has governmental control over the United States of America? The United States of American government. And then there is local control and there's state control, and we'll develop these as we go along. All right, next, economic social satisfaction. We'll talk about this. Some key things that we want to talk about economic social satisfaction is we kind of said, right, I mean, for the people to feel like they're economically, socially satisfied, they've got to feel like their needs are being met, right? And when you talk about basic needs, you're like food, shelter, air, okay? Income, so that you can buy those things that you want. Got that? So generally in this country, when the economy is seen as doing pretty well, the people who are in government already tend to stay in government. Yeah, like, for example, Donald Trump. It's been very interesting because one of the things that has occurred as a result of the COVID is that it's put a real hamper on the economy. The economy was doing better before the COVID and quarantines and things like that. And so that's one of the reasons why Donald Trump's like, I really don't like COVID, because he's up for re-election. And if the economy is doing really well, that helps him. If the economy is not doing very well, even though he doesn't have control over everything, then it hurts him. Because, write this down, people care about their economic social satisfaction, right? They care about it. Here's something you need to know, though. It differs from place to place and person to person in different parts of the world. You're like, what do you mean it differs? In some parts of the world, basic food is all you need for a government to provide or for the people to be able to have access to. I'll say it another way that maybe will help more. Some places in the world, their people's expectations are lower, so that they will be satisfied perhaps with maybe less than what you would be satisfied with. I'll say it another way. I want to spell this out before I take any questions. You ready? I'll ask you this. Do you anticipate that you will have the same kind of economic and social situation that your parents have? Will you be able to have the same kind of income and homes and stuff that, wow, how many of you guys think that I'm going to do as well as my parent and live as well as my parent or better? Okay? How many of you guys are like, you're kind of gloomy about that a little bit? You're like, I see some concerns. Now here is the implication. Ready? If people have an expectation that things are going to be at where they are, maybe a little bit better, if it goes down, that's bad for government. If people's expectations are that things are going to be good and they're not, who are they going to be dissatisfied with? They're going to be dissatisfied with the government. And they might, in a democracy, they might vote for the other party, but then when the other party comes in and it doesn't change that much because there's only so many things you can do, what are they going to call for? Like a whole revolution to bring in a whole new political system? That's where it gets interesting. That sometimes it's not the times when the economy is going down that are dangerous for governments. It's when the economy is going up, but not everyone is doing well. What if you and you and you were doing economically well and everyone else is stuck? And now they're looking over at you and it's like, well, it was great when everybody was not doing so well, but to see you guys prospering and the government doesn't seem to be helping out me, and it looks like